Recording. Okay, well, last time we were talking about flow, going with flow, being in the zone. Thank you, Steph Curry, all that kind of thing. And we talked about Alex Honnold, who thought it was a great idea to risk his life for fun and pleasure. But this idea of flow, I think we all see this now. The two examples we gave of Eula Wang and Alex Honnold are not typical. They are people who they found their passion, which we all wander around looking for something we really, really want to do a lot and forget ourselves, lose ourselves in. But they were that professor at NYU named Scott Galloway said this: don't tell the kids to find their passion only, because only 1% have the talent, innate talent and genes, and therefore the motivation to actually make a living off of it, or become famous and therefore make a living off of it. So they were that. What do you do instead? You got a great hobby. And hobbies lead to great things too. They begin that way, but it's a hobby thing. We've all seen, guys who about the railroad. There's people who just do nothing. People who collect things, but it's great. That's category two. It's not, you're not a superstar, but you're happy. Today, there's a third category, and this is the most significant of our 6 classes in terms of people we engage and know about. These are heroes. And right away, what is a hero? What is a hero? It's not the fame, the money, and power. Maya Angelou, I was looking around and I found her. She said, a hero is something that they do, that they work really hard in order to leave something for the world, for the better good of the world. They subordinate themselves to the accomplishment of something greater than themselves, in a detached way, like Thomas Edison. The two people today are like that. James Rumsey. If I said James Rumsey and John Hall, you would say, who? So what? There isn't a thing in the world that has to do with interchangeable parts. Being able to reproduce an object made of metal, but now with plastics, it's unlimited. The variations designs and variations through which you can identify and create an infinite number of exactly similar things. That would never have happened had there not been this obsessed John Hall in Harpers Ferry from 1825 up to about 1841. And he was facing overwhelming political pushback from what was called the junto, which was the powers that be in Harpers Ferry, the local guys who were very jealous and resentful of him having his own operation funded for just research by the Ordnance Department in Washington, whereas they were the ones who controlled a lot of the town, but they were the arsenal that we all know about on the Potomac River, and they were supposed to just turn out weapons. And when he died, his wife, everything possible was done to block him. And they don't really talk about him much at Harpers Ferry, because what happened was he was obstructed here. And they did everything, they took away his budget, they took away his, but the point is, he succeeded and that the drama is in the video. And the cat had already gotten out of the bag. His method had already escaped their clutches. And so when he died, and his wife wrote a letter to the ordnance department, she said, my poor husband, worked himself to death for this. And it was incredibly complicated. I'll explain it. And it was, he's self-consciously, putting himself on the line for it. But here's the great part. How big was it? Every one of the other armories were using his method while they were trying to beat him up here. And everybody today still thinks Springfield Armory was the source of it. It was John Hall here. And, Jim, are you exaggerating? No, just one more thing. 1852, London, the incredible Crystal Palace exhibition, the first World's Fair. And they put out a call to all the countries in the world to send their most fabulous achievements. Were you familiar with it now? Initially, America, this is hilarious. They sent things like a new apple peeler. and finally, we were gonna look like fools. If you ever saw the Crystal Palace, this is Prince Albert's great achievement. George Peabody, not a slave owner, but he's a classic Puritan philanthropist from Boston. He says, what do we need? What do we need? And Horace Greeley, the New York Times, we're not gonna do this, it's ridiculous. Well, the money went out and the gates opened. And the Brits thought they were the only smart people in the world, because they had James Watt, who was also in the Rumsey story, steam engine. And then they start looking at the American stuff. Samuel Colt, repeatable revolver. Mr. Firestone, the new tires. Matthew Brady, photography. Cyrus McCormick's Reaper. Forget the apple peel. And there's one guy in London that's very proud of their banks. They're impenetrable, secure. And a guy named Chubb from Connecticut said, I can crack their lock. I'll show you right here. Just wait, I'll crack it. In 15 minutes, he cracked the lock. The bank, but boy, marketer. They did it again. So and all of that. And do you know which one won first prize? Hall had already died. But a company up in New England got first prize for his method of making identical rifles. That won first prize over all of those things. Okay, that's pretty cool. So I just wanted to tee that up. It's very dramatic. Henry Ford, after the war, bicycles used the method because it was something to be adapted. It wasn't one little widget, it was a system. And they didn't even need skilled labor to do it. That's the amazing part. It's called the American Factory System. Thank you, John Hall. This is huge. And it's the whole world now. And now, like I said, now things are plastic. This is infinite applications. So, right there in Harpers Ferry. All right.
Was he fabulously rich from this, and maybe his descendants are still around?
Listen, this is the ordnance department was so smart. They said, we'll fund you, we'll support you, but you must. It's like open source. Anybody can use it. There was wisdom back then, which we desperately need today. But he said, fine, I'll get a royalty. I have to get a royalty. And you know how tragic it was? The guys who didn't want him to succeed here, the local politicians, did everything to make production impossible, because that was going to be his royalties. And he soldiered on, and thank goodness he had a protege named James Henry Burton. And was he a significant messenger or, proselytizer of this? A very good blacksmith who could make a musket himself told me James Henry Burton was a rock star of arms manufacture. He used the method, and he did it for arms works in the South, unfortunately. Last comment, and then we'll get on with it. When England saw what this guy did, this rifle thing, they just were completely out, suddenly they weren't number one anymore. They hurried over here and paid like $300,000 buying everything they could that would help them replicate the method that Hall figured out. And the one thing the Brits will never tell you is the Royal Alms Factory, which is like so British, it's unbelievable, horrible. They'll never tell you that the man who was hired to make those rifles was an American named James Henry Burton. You will not find that in any website, but they paid him off to come to tell them. Big stuff. Okay. But we're just gonna jump right into Rumsey now. Let's just I could tell you all that because there's gonna be about a 50-minute video about Rumsey, but the politics are incredible. And he's fighting toe to toe with Bolton and Watt. James Watt, the world's biggest steam engine company, fighting toe to toe to have his steamboat realized fully. But that's the first video. I indulged myself on the other because I only set aside half an hour. I took care of some of that right now. Do you have any questions?
How come the British were so much better at using the procedure than the Americans are?
The Americans, you're right.
The whole war, we had to buy British muskets.
Well, here's what they were doing. And my source was the blacksmith who used to work at the Park Service. They had a bunch of crap in their warehouses at the beginning of the war. They're just old, busted, not very good. And they just dumped it on both North and South. And then what the rifle that was based on Hall was called the Mississippi rifle. And Burton, when Burton came in, at that point, they just emptied their warehouses with junk.
They wound up, the Civil War, the Enfields, with the big guns.
Yes, exactly.
British guns.
Exactly. But remember, James Henry Burton ran the Enfield's rifle factory. Isn't that ironic? Oh, the British will never admit to that. So anyway, it's kind of interesting when you understand that the ideas made bicycles, made sewing machines, and then it was used on the the first car. And then Henry Ford understood the interchangeable parts, but then he just made the semi-line move. And from that point on, that's where my joke is John Hall was the guy who taught us how to have lots of cool things and a real boring job. Because all recognized. Okay. Let's do it. Let's do James Rumsey. Can I do it? We just want to pop down. Okay, and we can skip through that. This is all talking about here. What do you think is a hero? And there's my Angelou. And sometimes you look around on Facebook Shorts and you find what you need. Okay, now I'm just about to hit play. Rumsey goes he's proven he invented this jet ski. When people say he invented the steamboat, very specifically, he invented something on the water that went forward because you push water in the back. That's what he did here. And this video will begin summarizing that moment. And what is true is this, and it's not in the video. He made everybody start thinking about steam on water. Washington gave him a letter of support. It was a little premature because it didn't have the thing that was great about Rumsey was called the tube boiler, which was later what was the idea behind steam turbine technology and power plants all over the world today. That's what he did. But the steamboat got everybody thinking differently. Ben Franklin got the Philadelphia, the one in the society in Philadelphia. He paid for him to go to England and gave him a letter of support, which opens all the doors. And you're going to find out when Thomas Jefferson, my research mind says, I'd like to know what Thomas Jefferson thought of this guy. He's the one you want to know. And you're going to see in the video that there came a day when they hung out together. And the next day, Jefferson wrote Joseph Willard of Harvard, president. On the whole, Rumsey is the greatest, most original mechanical genius I've ever seen. So now we know we're on the real thing. So let's begin the video, but you're going to see how you're going to hear his determination. I mean, he's trying to make something that's never been done before in Shepherdstown, using pieces of iron from the Antietam Iron Works. And it wasn't going to work very well because it leaked. He didn't have high skill. He only had, and do me this one favor, Cindy. Drop down. We're going to back up to that. Oh, do I do it? Yeah. There's that. But here's the thing. We talked about inspiration. This is one of the very best examples of something that gets somebody passionate. His whole name was John Theophilus Desigalian. We talked about this. Don't name your kid that. He'll get beat up on the playground. What he did, he was the man who was able to put Isaac Newton's ideas in a palatable form to the public. And books are dangerous. And James Rumsey got a copy. And Dan Tokar is a genius with metal, if you know who he is, who takes care of the clock. He told me this. He said, change the image, next one. Do I do that? I'll do it. See him, all the ID, that's me playing around with the computer. Dan said that Rumsey no longer would just bang on metal until trial and error, you find something. That was what all they did, bang around and try this and try that and bang around, try this. He was the first one, the conceptual, scientific concept to test through experimentation. He started the scientific method towards what he did. That's another huge thing. And Dan said, James Rumsey could visualize in his mind's eye objects that never appeared before, manifested before, but he would have a widget and he'd imagine it going forward or imagine it going backward. He put it on the side. He just assemble and disassemble in his imagination. So a book, in his case, was the match. And it's just like the guy climbing El Capitan. He's gonna climb his own El Capitan because it's what he can do. And it's very heroic. Okay, let's start the video. Oh, that's me again. Do you do that?
Maybe, yeah.
And I want you to move to 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Just back up to 2:50. Here we go.
On that December 3rd morning in 1787, Rumsey's crude steamboat, with a two-boiler made from cut iron scrap and an engine put together by the brazing process, eased into the Potomac.
Henry Bettinger and General Horatio Gates and many others witnessed and cheered at what Rumsey billed as the first successful steamboat demonstration. "By God, she moves," one cried, and wrote Bettinger, after going for half a mile or more to a point opposite what is known as Swearingen Spring, she rounded to and returned, going for some little distance. Thus she continued to go to and fro and up and down the river for about the space of 2 hours. This demonstration and the very last steamboat demonstration of Rumsey's, both lasting only for part of a day, were his only successful steamboat demonstrations, as he was vexed by lack of funds, poor materials, unskilled workmen, and the specter of rival inventors and companies. Yet, all throughout, thick and thin, he was imagining in his mind's playfully protean laboratory a plethora of inventions that have survived and shaped the world we live in today. He wrote Washington in the spring of 1788, "Tomorrow morning I throw myself upon the wide world in pursuit of my own plans, being no longer able to proceed upon my own foundations. I shall bend my course for Philadelphia, where I hope to have in my power to convince a Franklin and a Rittenhouse." To spur him on to new heights, Ben Franklin, another great American who was impressed by Rumsey's ideas, made himself the first to subscribe, and others promptly followed, launching the Rumseyan Society, and they ponied up 200 pounds sterling and bid Rumsey to go to London, where the real entrepreneurial action was. On May 14th, Rumsey wrote his friend Charles Morrow, "In 2 hours I shall be on board a ship bound for London with a bill for 200 pounds sterling in my pocket. And the best letters Philadelphia can afford, Dr. Franklin is writing a letter for me. This, Charles, is my meridian. If I do not do something now, I am done." Philadelphia, May 14, 1788. Dear friend, the bearer, Mr. Rumsey, goes to England with a view of making some advantage to himself by an invention which he thinks may be useful to others, vis-a-vis an improvement of boilers for steam engines, whereby 9/10 of the fuel may be saved, and the machine applied with convenience to the forcing boats against the stream of rivers. He apprehends that another mechanician of this country is endeavoring to deprive him of such advantages by pretending an a priori right to the invention. And as he will be quite a stranger in England and unacquainted with the modes of proceeding in public affairs, I beg leave to recommend him to your friendly counsels, which will much oblige Benjamin Vaughan, Esquire, yours affectionately, B. Franklin. Mr. Rumsey is a person of good character and reputation in this country.
A rose from out the azure bay.
This was the charter of the land, and guardian angels sang this strain.
Rumsey delivered the letter to Franklin's friend, Dr. Benjamin Vaughan, who delivered it to Matthew Boulton, the co-owner of Boulton and Watt, the world's largest and most successful steam engine company. Vaughan met Boulton in his offices in Birmingham. Boulton already knew and studied what both Rumsey and his rival John Fitch claimed about their alleged steamboats. He knew, too, that steam-driven navigation in canals, on rivers, and the high seas was the next big get. Reading their accounts line by line and page by page, he found Fitch's paddle wheel boat cumbersome, but was intrigued with Rumsey's ingenuity. Rumsey wrote later, "I showed Mr. Fitch's pamphlet to Messrs. B&W, and on reading it pronounced him an ignorant person who knew little about the matter he was engaged in. They were quite displeased at the general claim he lays to all steamboats, and say he must be very badly informed about the customs of Europe." 6 months earlier, Rumsey had eased into the Potomac at Shepherdstown, a boat driven by jet propulsion.
I scarcely understand this myself.
The thrust or vacuum stroke.
Two boilers important.
When the control valve is flipped, the steam cylinder is connected to the condenser, which condenses the steam, creating a vacuum. Because of the vacuum in the steam cylinder, air pressure now pushes the steam piston and water piston down, forcing water out of the water cylinder, through the trunk line, and out the stern. By reaction, this mass of water thrown backward propels the boat forward in the same way as a jet or rocket. At the same time, more water is pumped into the water tube boiler by the injector pump, and condensed water and trapped air are pumped out of the condenser by the air pump. Notice the water passing through the trunk line flapper valves during the steam stroke. These allow water from the thrust stroke to continue moving out the trunk line during the intake of new water through the river valves.
This is the most technical thing in the video.
The intake or steam stroke. Live steam is allowed into the steam cylinder by the control valve and pushes up the steam piston. The connecting rod pulls up the water piston, thus drawing water in through the river valves into the water cylinder. At the top of the stroke, the control valve is flipped to start the thrust or vacuum stroke. Rumsey needed Boulton and Watt's skills and resources. This boat, tried in Shepherdstown, was made from local iron ores, scraps from musket barrels, lead solder, tin, and the wood from endless forests. It moved, fully loaded, against the current, sometimes at 4 miles per hour. But the 200 feet of tubing comprising the boiler and assembled by the brazing process sprung leaks. They certainly could help him. Bolton's partner, the abstracted James Watt, had added a condenser to the inefficient Newcomen steam engine that had been used to little effect to relieve England's mines of water. Watt's enormous improvement to the engine triggered the Industrial Revolution in England because water-free mines could be dug deeper and to much more coal. But Watt's steam engine was too big for most boats. Rumsey's smallish water tube boiler for a smallish steam engine-driven boat was a true step forward, and even a few steps ahead of Bolton and Watt. Watt feared that all the pressure within those many-angled pipes of the tube boiler would cause fierce explosions, a problem that did occur in later years with improperly made water tube boilers on boats. But Rumsey's boiler occupied a fraction of the space on a boat than would Watt's big steam engine. Unlike Watt's, Rumsey's boiler design heated the water more efficiently because it exposed uniformly. Rumsey's boiler, with its 200 feet of joined iron tubing, carried water as it was being heated on all sides by surrounding flame, all within the boiler. Watt's was the reverse, a heat-generating tube that heated unequally all the water that filled the boiler's general space. He called it an atmospheric boiler.
When Britain first advanced our land, arose from out the azure main, arose from out the azure main.
On July 3rd, the three met for the first time at Bolton and Watt's offices in Birmingham. They worked, negotiated together with high hopes for 2 months. They agreed to form a partnership. They promised Rumsey the services of their master mechanic, a Mr. Handley, and Rumsey was to report regularly on the progress he and Handley made on his demonstration water tube boiler steamboat.
Rumsey's suspicious. Why does Handley have to be there?
But Rumsey was dismayed when he read Bolton's proposed agreement, especially that Bolton and Watt would claim all forms of steamboat navigation as their own. Rumsey and Vaughan wrote a letter on August 6th to Bolton, stating that he had no connection with Bolton and Watt, that they didn't need Mr. Handley, and that they could make steamboats in Ireland, where English patents were often disregarded. They also refused to abandon their Rumseyan Society backers back home. Bolton wrote back on August 14th, "Sir, it appears to me there is so great a change in your sentiments that I have little hopes of our forming any connection, because you reason as if you expected shadows to counterbalance substance. I sincerely wish you may fully reap the fruits of your own labor and inventions, and hope you will allow us to do the same. As to boilers, you must allow me to observe that Mr. Watt was the first and only discoverer of the precise quantity of water and the exact quantity of steam of a given elasticity, as well as the knowledge of the total quantity of the heat producible by a given measure of such coals as this country produces, and thereby we are enabled to know the utmost limits of boilers. I can't help but smile at Mr. Vaughan's reasoning upon the subject, which I own is very ingenious. But my opinion is that when he hath tried as many boilers as we have, hundreds, he will have discovered some mistakes in it. There are many cases in which your boiler cannot be used, and there are many in which it may, and therefore we wish not to discourage you from taking out a patent for it, and will render you any assistance in our power in the introduction of it. It now appears to me that our sentiments are not in unison, and that you have mistaken your road to the goal in view. However, I shall forbear saying more until I have had a conference with Mr. Watt upon the subject, and interim remain, Sir, your most obedient humble servant. The next day, the agitated Bolton wrote his partner Watt, Vaughan seems to have the total possession of Rumsey, but he shall never have possession of me. That part of Vaughan's letter in which he intimates that if we are not connected with Rumsey, other machinists may be found, and the engines may be made in Ireland where no regard is paid to patents. This shows the principles of the man in so clear a point of view that I cannot express how much I detest him. But perhaps you'll say I'm in a passion, and perhaps I am, and I hope I shall never be so void of feeling as to be insensible to such rascally principles. There is a sycophantic affectation of respect and threat through his letter. Rumsey appears to have informed Bolton that he had submitted an application for a patent in the London Patent Office. Rumsey also made new overtures that Bolton considered naive, having adopted scientific approaches and thought experiments into his researches, all inspired by writings on Newtonian physics and by one John Desaguliers. Along with all these positive influences, Rumsey had also bought into the wrong notion that if a scientific idea is proven by math and physics, then if you try to manufacture such an object, it will produce exactly as expected. On August 29th, Bolton unleashed all his frustrations in a letter that in today's modern slang would be called the kiss-off letter. Though we are in general much averse to partnerships or close connections for carrying on new inventions, yet from the very favorable opinion we formed of your abilities and character, we were induced to make you offers which we shall not probably make to any other person in the like circumstances. On fully considering the objections you state to these offers, and also the fresh proposals you make in lieu of them, we do not think there is any prospect of any terms being proposed which could make a connection agreeable to both parties. It is therefore our opinion and desire that the negotiations should now terminate, having nothing farther to propose on our grant, except our wish to remain on a friendly footing with you. we recommended Mr. Hanley to you as a person who has always done our business faithfully, as we expect he will do yours. We had no other motive whatever for wishing you to employ him, and though we look upon your continuing to do so as a mark of your confidence in us and of your candor, yet we cannot desire you to employ him any longer than seems to suit your interest. In regard to your new boiler, consisting of a narrow tube bent in a spiral or zigzag form containing the water within it and having the fire or flame applied to the outside of it, the drawing of which you showed us, we shall give no opposition to your obtaining a patent for it, and shall observe the necessary secrecy until that patent is completed, in which we wish you success. We beg leave, however, to remind you of what we formerly mentioned to you, that boilers consisting of tubes bent in similar manner, but having the fire or flame passing through the inside of them and the water on the outside, have been made, both by ourselves and others, and that our James Watt once made a boiler, the great bars of which were hollow tubes on which the fire rested, under an arch of metal surrounded with water. It is with regret that we find ourselves obliged to say that we cannot resign our claim to the use of the method of employing the power of steam engines to the propelling of boats by the reaction of water confined in tubes and acted upon by pistons or oars, and also in rivers and canals by means of poles acting upon their bottoms, and the same candor you have observed towards us obliges us to inform you that we shall immediately take steps as will render any patent for that purpose of no avail.
I'm going to go to war against them.
Rumsey, with his motto, "Conquer or Fall," charged ahead to build the much-desired demonstration of the steamboat, which he called the Columbia Maid, again with little funding and relying mostly on his own mechanical skills. Conquer or fall, Rumsey was carried by what George Washington once called his overflowing evolutions. This is the time when he got his posterity portrait painted by fellow expatriate George West, who incidentally had an artistic apprentice named Robert Fulton, who had an inquiring mind that written records indicate Rumsey engaged. The fresh air of freedom in his work fed an extraordinary 4-year period of profound invention that in the end wore his brain out. Wrote technology historian Edwin T. Layton, James Rumsey, a remarkable American inventor of the 18th century, is today almost forgotten. To some extent, this is due to the loss of all his United States patents in the Great Patent Office fire of 1836. But his 4 British patents, describing more than 20 inventions, have survived, and they and other sources make it apparent that Rumsey was one of America's most creative inventors. He made several major contributions to the steamboat. His most important invention was his reaction wheel, which served as a starting point for the highly fruitful work by Americans on hydraulic turbines. Rumsey's greatest achievement, however, lay not in any of his 20 to 30 inventions, but in his role in changing the very process of invention. He forged new links between science and technology in an age when Newtonian mechanics was still new and invention was still largely a matter of craftsmanship and trial and error. He brought the two together by creating ways of thinking that have become integral to the modern engineering design. Call it the Industrial Enlightenment. In March 1789, Rumsey set aside his intense work on the Columbia Maid and went to Paris to see Ambassador Thomas Jefferson. He wanted to discuss a common interest, patent law in the new United States. The humorist Rumsey described his day with Thomas Jefferson to an old friend. "I have this day had a good ride upon my hobby. It was by the particular request of our American ambassador that I took this ride, and glad I was of the opportunity of mounting, having been so long out of practice. By being in a country where the people could not understand the language in which I explained Hobby's Gates. Mr. Jefferson's hotel was the place appointed for me to exercise, and I had not been long mounted before Mr. Jefferson bore me company. And fine sport we should have had, would time have permitted. But dinner time came on, and company arrived that had been invited to dine. The horse was therefore obliged to be stabled. However, Mr. Jefferson was so pleased with Hobby that he borrowed him of me with the explanation of his gates. I know very well that what I have said will convey to you a very clear idea of the business of the day, but I beg you not to explain it to anybody, not nobody, in the same way. To be serious, you cannot conceive how attentive Mr. Jefferson has been to my business. He has been to the hotels of a great number of the nobility to gain their interest in my favor. I have no doubt but I shall succeed in the object of my journey." A few days later, Ambassador Jefferson wrote to a close friend about his visit with James Rumsey, calling Rumsey one of two discovered scientists. Jefferson wrote, "Mr. Rumsey has also obtained a patent for his navigation by the force of steam in England, and is soliciting a similar one here. His principal merit is in the improvement of the boiler, and instead of the complicated machinery of oars and paddles proposed by others, the substitution of so simple a thing as the reaction of a stream of water on his vessel. He is building a sea vessel at this time in England, and she will be ready for an experiment in May. He has suggested a great number of mechanical improvements in a variety of branches, and upon the whole, is the most original and greatest mechanical genius I have ever seen."
said, what you said in the handwriting.
When May came, Jefferson received a letter from Rumsey. The machine from our vessel has not gone on so briskly as I expected. The case, I believe, with all new inventions, the mechanics not being able to execute them with such dispatch as they do those they are acquainted with. I am, sir, under many obligations to you for your kind attention to my business in France, and shall ever remember your friendship with gratitude. When he had finished no machines, even the Rumseyan Society abandoned Rumsey. Impatient with his constant revisions of ideas, they just wanted their money. His faithful assistant, Joseph Barnes, wrote to Charles Moreau, Rumsey observed that he used to be more unfortunate than others because he met with more impositions from his fellow man, but almost too late he found the truth to his own credulity and want of a competent knowledge of mankind, of which he observes the city of London is an excellent teacher. He soberly wrote in April 1792 a Dr. McMeechan, a partner, back home. Bless yourself that you are living in the peaceful shades of Berkeley. I have frequently been in the prisons here on purpose to make them familiar to me, as I have long expected that one of them must eventually become my abode. I will not describe them to you. They are too horrid for your contemplation. If, however, you should dwell upon the idea, conceive a man shut up with thousands of hardened and unhappy wretches, without the allowance of even bread and water to subsist on. Believe me, this is literally true. And to add to the horror, be assured that a man, the moment he is locked up, is no more thought of or sought after than if he was in his grave. How it will end, to use Barnes's expression, heaven only knows. The due date for the Columbia Maid was fast approaching. He wrote his friend, the painter George West. About the middle of November, we took her out, almost everything ready for experiment. For to try, we fell down the river near to Greenwich, where we were making preparations, and tried our boiler, which answered to admiration. She was made fast by consent of the captain to a ship belonging to a charity society called the Marine Society. A haughty member of the society came on board and ordered the captain to have her cast off. This order was put into execution upon an ebb tide, and our careless, worthless master, worse than a Tory, let her go on shore. I was on board an hour later, but it was too late. She lay down as the tide
Could
left
have
her,
been sabotage.
and unfortunately, upon the said ship's anchor and some piles that were driven around it, which as the tide went down, went through her bottom and made holes so large that the water flowed in and prevented her from rising when the tide rose, which at high water was 8 feet over her dock. In this situation, during 5 tides, on the 6th, we got her afloat, which cost for workmen, boats, etc. about 24 guineas.
See, Bolton and Watt didn't want this.
Rumsey stood up before the Art Society of London to speak. An eyewitness wrote, "He went to the committee room and in due course delivered a lecture, to the admiration and satisfaction of all present, after which he was busy wording resolutions, when he perceived to lift instinctively his right hand to his temple and complain of violent pain, which were the last articulate words he spoke. Rumsey died the next day at the age of 49. The doctor surmised that he had died of an overheated brain. He was buried in St. Margaret's Chapel at Westminster Abbey. The English knew what sort of man he was. The Columbia Maid demonstrated on the Thames as planned, doing a respectable 4 miles per hour.
Robert Fulton and Bolton and Watt certainly were studying Rumsey's drawings and explanations in his 4 patents at the London Patent Office. Certainly they did so. With Rumsey gone, his executor recently dying, and ownership to his ideas in disarray, Rumsey had even sold some of his patents to others, who too now were in debt. Be it the many illustrations and notes in the 2-boiler patent in 1788, James Watt would oppose the high-pressure steam boiler for safety reasons, but Rumsey's high-pressure 2-boiler has been evolved and is used in ocean-going vessels and in power generation plants worldwide. Or the 1790 patent, in which Rumsey wrote and illustrated that since fluids under pressure give pressure in all directions equally, that a steam cylinder, therefore, could be placed on its side on a shallow draft flat-bottomed boat and on the same deck as the paddle wheels. Rumsey wrote that if the steam cylinder was then connected to the paddle wheels using a long connecting rod or pitman, all of the boat's propulsive system could be placed on just one deck instead of 2. A very important and necessary invention for boats in shallow waters, like parts of the Mississippi, which Rumsey refined more in his 1792 patent. Or Rumsey's speculations in his 1792 patent using Archimedes' screw pump that takes a water screw pump with a helical column inside a pipe and turning a handle at one end to carry water up through the pipe as the water is caught in the spiral grooves and is lifted as they rotate. Rumsey imagined running in reverse this procedure propelling the water away from the user, with that force used as mechanical power. Thus, he anticipated the screw propeller that by 1830 was replacing Fulton and Watt's paddle wheel concept. Edwin Layton writes that today the screw propeller for propulsion is manifest on ocean-going vessels and jet-propelled aircraft. And in his 1792 patent, he made improvements to the Barker's mill, also called a reaction mill, suggesting the inclusion of vanes inside the wheel and vanes that overlap the outside of the wheel of the reaction mill. The design of these vanes, according to Layton, paved the way for a reaction turbine with a potential efficiency of 100%, and was an insight which in time became one of the fundamental design principles for turbines. Rumsey's brother-in-law Joseph Barnes contracted Rumsey Mills for the American Philosophical Society, building many such Rumsey-certified reaction mills with excellent results throughout the mid-Atlantic states. Or there is the Royal Patent number 1738, dated March 23, 1790. According to Jeannie Mosier of the Berkeley Springs Museum, Rumsey patented a number of new and improved methods of applying power of water, of air, and of steam to the purposes of milling. The inventions include a progressive and retrograde water mill, improvement on Dr. Barker's mill, retrograde machine for sawmills, and inverted steam engines for raising water.
Fulton had no drawings at all of his own.
In 1793, Fulton maintained a folder on Rumsey's patents and drew his first draft of the Clermont.
Those are drawings.
6 months after Rumsey's death, Fulton wrote to Lord Stanhope, a prospective backer, that he began his, quote, experiments on the steamboat that June 1793. On November 4th, 1794, he wrote Boulton and Watt wanting to buy, quote, a steam engine designed to be placed in a boat, and he wished it to have as little space as possible. Time went by. According to Messrs. J. and W. H. Rankine, many years later, in their book, Mr. Fulton, it is proved beyond the possibility of dispute, was on board William Symington's first steamboat, called the Charlotte Dundas, and in the month of July 1801, was carried in her 8 miles on the Forth and Clyde Canal in an hour and 20 minutes, receiving explanations and taking sketches both of the boat and her machinery, prior to his being able to succeed in propelling a steam vessel on the Hudson River in America in 1807. The Charlotte Dundas, a victim of elapsed funding, was indeed the first commercially viable steamboat.
That was called real inspiration.
And Fulton's Clermont had much of its design and details. Neither the Charlotte Dundas or Fulton's Clermont utilized Rumsey's tube boiler. But Rumsey stuck by the merit and superiority of even the earliest patented boilers that he created. Wrote Bennett Woolcroft many years later, "The propelling machinery for Rumsey's Columbia made was similar to that shown in the drawing of his patent of November 6, 1788, marked Figure 19. Rumsey's true legacy is revealed. On January 21, 1805, Fulton bought the steam engine for his prospective steamboat from Boulton and Watt for £548. Politically determined restrictions against shipping this prized British creation to the United States were lifted. And it was not an engine with a tube boiler like Rumsey's, but instead James Watt's larger, improved, but still low-pressure steam engine. It appears Fulton opted for the steam engine that had a record of prolonged performance, as shown on Symington's Charlotte Dundas. And even if it lacked the efficiencies of Rumsey's high-pressure tube boiler, Fulton dressed out his steamboat with one thing Rumsey did not employ: paddle wheels, to make up for any lack of motive power. On August 17, 1807, Fulton's Clermont worked beautifully, and the decades of laughter at steamboats stopped right there that day at the shoreline of New York's Hudson River. Fulton succeeded grandly. The world changed. Fulton was a brilliant aggregator who was at the right place, the Hudson River with steep bluffs on all sides, and New York City with deep pockets of investors on all sides. In a decade or two, ironically, Rumsey's ideas were realized on many fronts. It would come to pass that the screw propeller, not paddle wheels, propelled ocean-going vessels in the high seas. And even still today, Rumsey's ideas continue to assist around the world in real operations, especially as the preferred means to bring us electrical power.
Hello viewers, welcome to Tech Study Cell. In this video we will see how a coal-based thermal power plant generates electricity in a detailed step-by-step manner. This video will give you a basic idea of the operation of steam-based thermal power plant. A thermal power station is a power plant in which heat energy is converted to electric power. Here we will discuss the functions of the main components of thermal power plant like boiler, steam turbine, generator, or alternator and transformer. Now at first pulverized coal, delivered from transport barges, is mixed with air and blown into the boiler furnace through nozzles. It is burned at temperature above 2000 Fahrenheit. The boiler is a rectangular furnace about 50 feet on a side and 130 feet tall. Its walls are made of a web of high-pressure steel tubes about 2.3 inches in diameter. Here the chemical energy in coal becomes heat energy when the coal is burned in the furnace. As the water in the boiler circulates through tubes, absorbs heat, and changes into steam. Then the steam is separated from the water inside a drum at the top of the furnace. The saturated steam is introduced into superheat pendant tubes that hang in the hottest part of the combustion gases as they exit the furnace. Here the steam is superheated to 1000 Fahrenheit to prepare it for the turbine. Steam turbine resembles a giant fan with hundreds of blades. High-capacity power plants use different stages of steam turbines, such as high-pressure turbine, intermediate pressure turbine and low-pressure turbine. In order to turn the steam turbine, you have to supply a high pressure and temperature steam at the inlet of the turbine. As the turbine absorbs energy from the high-energy fluid, its pressure and temperature drop toward the outlet. Now the high-pressure steam is discharged against the fan-like turbine blade and the turbine starts rotating. Thus the heat energy is converted into kinetic energy. The steam turns the turbine blades, which turns the shaft, which is connected to the generator. The generator is where mechanical energy converted into electrical energy. Now as the shafts of the turbine and generator are mechanically coupled, so as the turbine turns, it spins the generator shaft, which mounted with giant electromagnets. The rotating magnet, called the rotor, turns within a stationary set of conductors wound in coils on an iron core, called the stator. The field cuts across the conductors, generating an induced EMF, electromotive force, according to the Faraday's law of electromagnetism, as the mechanical input causes the rotor to turn. Thus the mechanical energy in the turbine is changed to electrical energy in generator. As it is cheaper to generate at a relative lower voltage and then step it up for transmission to reduce transmission loss. The generated electrical energy leaves the generator and goes to a step-up transformer, where the voltage is raised to transmission voltage. Most of the power's generating plants are designed to operate at the generation voltage level 16.5 kV and 21 kV. But for power transmission, voltage level 220 kV, 400 kV, and 765 kV are used. Thermal power plants help meet almost half of the world's power demand.
He conquered and did not fall.
Folks in Shepherdstown speak of forms of men working by a December moon, or hear the busy beat of Rumsey's hammer in the still, dark night, and brought in on the fog, the voice of General Gates recalling, "By God she moves, and by God she did." Heaven only knew how it would all turn out.
Is there still a Rumsey in society?
Sort of, yes.
Is there or like a family?
Can we, Cindy, go out with that?
Have you seen the smaller model? Yeah, because we walked around the gym before.
So, you know, it's much more of a story there, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And what, do you have any comments or anything?
Did you pull all this together?
Yes.
This is the video and
Well,
everything?
not the schematics, I just ripped off those.
Yeah, but, okay.
Everything else is me.
Is that were you doing the narration too, or?
Yeah,
Okay, I thought so, yeah.
yeah,
It's
and,
good.
but he deserves a closer. Can you imagine the pressure on him with the debtors' prisons?
Well, that's the first I've heard of it, so he really thought because he was
Yeah, see,
begging for pennies, he's gonna
Well,
end up
see,
in debtor's prison.
I'll give you a little summary. The heroism was that Columbia Maid was really good. It worked, you know, but because there was no owner, everybody, you know, there was no, but it's ultimately he was right with this improved one, but he never had enough funding. He never had skilled labor, and he still fought for it. That's what the heroic part is. And you know, always remember Bolton and Watt sure as hell weren't gonna let him succeed with the steamboat without them. And they have all the power in the world in London. That's why I easily can understand attempts to sabotage it. But he
There's
is
a big problem with materials in those days.
yeah. But-
Iron is not a great.
As soon as we had super steels, you see everything. Bolton was the big guy for about 10 years, you know, but then all the super steels and the ocean going things all went to Rumsey. You know, it's a very heroic story. Talk about grit.
49 years old.
49 overheated brain.
Yes.
Stroke problem.
Yep. I'm so glad you wrote through that. It's a hell of a story.
Yeah, I learned more about how electricity is generated by steam in power plants today than I ever knew. And I wondered about that. How does the electricity come out of a power
Yeah,
plant?
people think
based on heat
that,
and
they think
steam
that the
phase?
uranium has something to do with the heat. It doesn't, you know.
Yeah, it was right at the end of this whole video, they were explaining that.
Yes.
So I learned more there than I ever knew.
Oh, guys, you gotta get a medal for riding through that. It's a great story, but it takes a lot of, what time are we at, Cindy? Probably 10 more minutes, 15 more minutes?
4:24.
Oh, great.
5 minutes.
So,
Oh, look, I'm gonna send you, it's on here. I'm gonna send it to you. How do we get this going? The John Hall part, I'll send this to you. Did you come after we did talk about John Hall, Gene? Okay, what I'm getting at is, okay, I'm gonna send you all this. And then I was going to read this part aloud about John Hall, okay? And that's it. Is that okay?
We can read it. Then we can talk about it next week.
Okay, all right.
The concept of steam,
What, Gene?
I apologize for being late.
Oh, that's okay. Well,
I'm with the writers conference and I had an interview with an agent for my book.
oh,
Yay.
excellent, excellent. It's very, very, very excusable.
I tried to change the time, but I couldn't. so-
No, but, I mean, would you agree with me? If you stick it out and watch the video, you get a lot out of it. It's quite a story.
It's recorded, so you can back.
now the concept of somebody being able to see stuff that nobody else can see. You ever want a hoot to go back and read Einstein's lectures when he won the Nobel Prize in the 26th, and he's talking about being on a train and things happening. And he's talking about the theory of relativity.
He's connecting the dots and it's.
Yeah, and if you can make sense of that and imagine what he imagined, that led to relativity.
Yes.
You're really smart.
See, that's what we're enjoying, is that people have some strange little dreaming. You're reading Isaac Newton, and you're trying to make mills in Shepherdstown. The water hits this, and how can I get the most energy out of it without losing any energy? And then you're reading Isaac Newton. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. He just probably went bananas when he saw that. Now, did you all catch the thing? I'm so glad I could share that with somebody. Is this? Bolton and Watt were right about, that's fine, you can do it, that's great, but our guy knows exactly how much. They were right about that. But do you know what they were really stupid about? Even we know that if you're trying to generate steam, which is better, right? The water inside the tube surrounded by flames is gonna do it far better instead of their thing. And did you see how they were playing? But you don't know this, but they were constantly litigating about their coal uses. They were always in court. That's why I said they were gonna screw them. They really were. Hanley was just gonna steal the whole thing. That was the assistant assigned to him, and he took notes every day. But did you notice the legalism when they said, well, no, everything that's a tube and everything that's water and fire is ours? Do you remember that?
oh, yeah.
They're doing the big corporate, we're gonna crush you thing. But you go, how could you guys not figure out that it's just a lot more if you have flames all around the water? That's what Rumsey was, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, yeah.
Thanks.
What's happening next week, Jim?
Those are the two heroes. Those are the two, John Hall, I'll send it John, but the next week I'll have to figure that one out. I haven't figured out which one to do.
Okay,
I
so
think we're gonna
that's-
do Swallow Barn, and there was a book written here about a farm, called The Bower. I think we'll do about 3 things short. This book was written in 1830 by John Pendleton Kennedy. He'd visited his family at the Bower that had like 80 slaves. But he wanted to capture the curious lifestyle of these people in this area. It was a very passing period. It was, and he wrote a book, and it was a huge bestseller. it became the first, it kind of gave this slightly false view of the happy plantation. And it was a hugely influential book. It was called the first book in the plantation literary tradition. And it was a little more candid, but he was Poe's patron, by the way. He saved Edgar Allan Poe's life.
What was the title of the book?
Swallow Barn.
Swallow Barn?
Yeah, and so the point is, this guy, John Penn, see, my only simple point here is, we're gonna take each person. And these two were really sacrificed everything and left a lasting legacy. Really, like nobody else. Martin Delaney, yes, did certain other, I know all the people and you sort of measure them. John Pendleton Kennedy and Julia Davis Adams were two people that just knew how to live a good life. There wasn't these obsessive invention things, you know what I mean? They were very balanced and they understood how to live. So that's pretty much what he's gonna do. I have to figure out what else to do. I think it might be Martin Delaney and John Pendleton Kennedy. Thank you so much.
See you next week.
Okay,
Jim, you know, you're talking about the guy who climbed this mountain, or
yeah, El Capitan.
what does he do for money? That seems to me like a massive hobby.
I don't want to say short-lived under the conditions.
I think he gets sponsored.
Yeah, I mean, do you know who you really should say? What about